Welcome to Organic Chemistry Lectures by Sheetal Bhatkurki. Today I will be talking about amino acids. The intent learning outcomes of this lecture will be we'll be discussing on essential amino acids, also the property and chemical as well as structure of the amino acids, isoelectric properties of the amino acids, synthesis of amino acids. Among the major classes of biomolecules, proteins have the most diverse array of function. Proteins are made up of several amino acids. As enzyme, they serve as the catalyst to affect chemical reactions. As antibody, they protect from diseases. As a molecule, they form critical structures including skin, hair, nail, and as a hormone, they control many body functions including metabolism, growth, reproduction. Now, all these proteins are made up of sequences of amino acids. Amino acids are further we call are containing the amine functionality and the acid or carboxylic acid group. Alpha amino acids. The term the alpha is added because alpha carbon is the chiral center, provided that the R group is not simply a hydrogen atom there. Therefore, the terminology comes alpha amino acids. Alpha because of chirality, amino because of amine group, acid because of the carboxylic acids. Each amino acid contains an amine group and a carboxylic group. It's presence of these two functional groups that enables amino acids to link together. An amino acid can have any number of carbon separating the two functionalities, but of particular interest are the alpha amino acid, in which the two functional groups are separated by exactly one carbon atom. Amino acids of the type are called alpha amino acids as shown here in the structure. Because the amino group is connected to the carbon atom, that is alpha to the carboxylic acid, therefore we call it as a alpha amino acid, and the position, configuration of the alpha position we will be discussing little later. Amino acids are coupled together by amide linkage, also called as peptide bonds. Relatively short amino acid chains are called peptides. A dipeptide is formed when two amino acids are coupled together. A tripeptide is formed from 3 amino acids. A tetrapeptide from the 4, and so on. Chains comprised of more than 40 to 50 amino acids are often called polypeptides, while still larger ones are called as proteins. Proteins serve a wide array of important biological function, which I will be saying a little bit of later. Naturally occurring amino acids, if we see, then hundreds of different amino acids are observed in nature, but only 20 amino acids are abundantly found in protein. The 20 alpha amino acids differ from each other only in the identity of the side chain, R group, which is indicated here. The structures of all 20 amino acids, together with the accepted 3-letter abbreviations and 1 letter of abbreviation for each amino acids, are written here. Except for the glycine, R is equal to H, all of these amino acids are chiral in nature, and nature typically employs only one enantiomer of each. The amino acids primarily observed in nature are called L amino acid. L, the amine group, is on my left hand side when I am standing towards the board. Therefore, it is L amino acid. For example, we have L-alanine where amine group is on left hand side again. We have L-serine Again, the amine group is on left hand side. L-glyceraldehyde, for example, is also on the left hand side. Glyceraldehyde, please note, is not an amino acid, but here I am indicating it with reference to the L-glyceraldehyde, I am assigning L-alanine and L-serine. In glyceraldehyde, the OH functionality is towards the left hand side when I am standing towards the board. So do in L-alanine and L-serine, the amine group is on the left hand side when I am standing towards the board. In addition to the 20 amino acids found in the protein, there are other amino acids used by organism for a variety of function. For example, if we see alpha aminobutyric acid, which is GABA, and thyroxine, these are the common amino acids that are found in the CNS system as well in our CNS system. Both of these compounds, they are not found in protein. GABA is found in the brain and acts as a neurotransmitter, while thyroxine is found in thyroid gland and acts as a hormone. There are many other examples as well to say that which are not included in the 20 essential amino acids found in the protein. So few of the 20 amino acids that are essential and are present in the protein include glycine, alanine, valine, leucine, isoleucine, phenylalanine, triosine, serine, leucine, isoleucine, threonine, cysteine, methionine, aspartate, glutamate, asparagate, and glutamine, proline, etc. So few of these are the 22 amino acids that are essential. That means our body cannot synthesize them, we need to definitely take them. Therefore, they are called essential amino acids. Let us look into the acid-base property of the amino acid. When an amino acid is dissolved in a solution at pH of 1, both functional group exist primarily in their deprotonated form, that is amine form and the OH hydroxy form. Each highlighted protons has its own unique pKa value here, often called pKa1 and pKa2. Notice that the carboxylic acid group is deprotonated first. That is, the first pKa value referred to the acidity of the carboxylic acid group, while the second pKa value referred to the acidity of the ammonium group. Some of the amino acids have side chain connecting either basic or acidic group. In that case, the amino acid will have a third pKa value associated with the side chain. As in example of arginine. Arginine has alpha amino acid with pK value as 2.17. Alpha amine group has 9.04 in it, and the side chain has around 12.48 pK value in it. Similarly, cysteine also. Cysteine has alpha carbon as 1.96, amine as 10.28, and side chain as 8.18, and so on. Please notice that the pK value of carboxylic acids are in the range of 2 to 3 or nearly for all the amino acid is in between 2 to 3. Alanine and all, which I just now said, right? Indeed, anionic form predominates at the physiological pH. Therefore, anion form is indicated here. Carboxylic acid, which has a carboxylate anion here. So that is what is predominantly observed. Now let us look at the pK value of amino group also. In case of amino group, we are able to see that the pK value range from 9 to 11 approximately in most of the amino acid. Alanine, I think I said as pK2 as 9.69. So at any pH above this 9.6, the unchanged form will predominate. At any above 9.69, the cationic form of the ammonium will predominate. indeed the cationic form dominates at physiological pH. So in summary, we can say that we can consider that the structure of amino acid at physiological pH will be the amine group protonated and the carboxylic acid group deprotonated. That's why amine group will bear positive charge because it will bind 4 bonds, therefore not carbon, please, 4 bonds, therefore it will bear positive charge. Whereas the acid is deprotonated, therefore it will bear the negative charge with extra lone pair of electrons. Therefore, it will be negative. In this form of amino acid is said to be a Zitter ion, which is a net neutral compound that exhibits charge separations. An amino acid can be thought of an internal salt, and such as it would exhibit many of the physical property of a salt. For example, amino acids are highly soluble in water and have higher melting point. Amino acids are also said to be amphoteric in nature because they react with either acid or base. When treated with a base, an amino acid will function as an acid by giving up a proton, that is ammonium group is deprotonated there. However, when treated with an acid, amine group will serve as a base by abstracting a proton, that is the carboxylic group is protonated there. So these two reactions shown here is in its Zitter ionic form, an amino acid functioning as an acid, functioning as a base. Let us look into the isoelectric point of amino acid. Each amino acid, there is a specific pH at which the concentration of Zitter ion forms reaches its maximum value. This pH is called as isoelectric point, which is also indicated as Pi, where the P is small or lowercase p with I being uppercase I. And each amino acid had its own Pi values. For amino acid that lack an acid or a basic side chain, the Pi is simply the average of two pKa values, that is pKa1 and pKa2. For example, in case of alanine, the pKa value of A is 9.69 for amine and pKb value for acid is 2.34. So average of both will be 6.02. For amino acids with acidic or basic side chain, the Pi is the average of two pK value that corresponds to the similar group. For example, if we see here in lysine, the pK value of ammonia is around 10.53, whereas the one more ammonia which is adjacent to the carboxylic acid has the pK value of 9.95. Therefore, we are going to take average of 10.53 plus the average of 9.95, but not for the carboxylic acid. Therefore, 10.53 plus 9.95 divided by 2 will give me around 9.74 as the Pi value for lysine. Same thing, glutamic acid if I take into consideration here, because both the functionality are carboxylic acid, therefore I am going to take the pK value of the carboxylic acid. Correspondingly, they are 4.25 and 2.19. So if I take average, it comes out to be around 3.2. Amino acid contain both basic and acidic group. In the dry solid state, amino acid exists as a dipolar form, a form in which the carboxylic group is present as a carboxylate ion and an aminium ion as a NH3 ion, so dipolar, so we call it as Zitter ions. So herein we have indicated the cationic form, predominant in strongly acidic solution, anionic form which is predominant in the basic solution form, right? So both we have been indicating here. Similarly, the cationic form having pK value 2.3 and anionic form which is again indicated here, right? So the pK of aminium ion of alanine is around 9.7. The equilibrium for loss of the aminium ion is shown in the blue color, and the red one more we are showing it in the pink color. So it is indicated here. the state of an amino acid that at any given point of pH is governed by the combination of two equilibria. So it is always governed by two equilibria. Therefore, isoelectric point, when we are calculating, we need to average both, right? Please recall the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation, which is pK is equal to pH plus log of HA concentration divided by A minus concentration. So please recall those. Do not forget that. This is a graph obtained when a titration is done, right? This is titration curve for these equilibria, which is indicated there. The graph here represents the change in pH as a function of a number of molar equivalent of base. Because alanine has two protons to lose in its net cationic form, when one molar equivalent of base has been added, the molecule will have each lost one proton, and they will be electrically neutral, that is dipolar or Zitter ion form, which is indicated here. So pK value 2.3, pK value 9.7, whereas pi value is around 6, so which is indicated here. In an amino acid that contains more than one acid or amine group, then how we are going to average? I just said in the previous slide that you are going to take average of both the acids or both the amine groups and take the average of that, right? So that's how we do for the when there are N terminal or C terminal present along with the amino acid in the amino acid. Separation of amino acids via electrophoresis. Amino acids can be separated from each other by a variety of technique, and one of them is the electrophoresis, which relies on a difference in the pi value and can be used to determine the number of different amino acid present in a mixture. In practice, we do add a few drops of mixture applied to the filter paper or the gel that is placed in a buffered solution between two electrodes. When an electric field is applied, the amino acids separate based on their difference in pi value, isoelectric value. If the pi of amino acid is greater than the pH of the solution, the amino acid will exit predominantly in a form that bears a positive charge and will migrate towards the cathode. The greater the difference between the pi and the pH, the faster it will migrate. An amino acid with a pi that is lower than the pH of the solution will exist predominantly in the form of that bears a negative charge and will migrate towards the anode. The greater the difference between pi and the pH, the faster it migrates here also. If two amino acids have similar pi, then pi values, then for example in glycine and leucine we find that, right, they have the similar pi value. The amino acid with a larger molecular weight will move more slowly because the charge has to carry a greater mass. However, amino acids are colorless, so detection technique is necessary in order to visualize the localization of various spots. So we do use various kinds of dyes there such that we are able to obtain a color and then identify them. So ninhydrin is commonly used in that case. Alpha amino acids can be synthesized by many routes. Especially the asymmetric synthesis of alpha amino acids is more challenging because biological activity of the natural enantiomeric form of alpha amino acids is predominantly seen, and as well as their commercial relevance for the products made by these routes are much preferred and are challenging in synthetic organic chemistry. Now let us see the first synthesizing method using potassium thalelamide. This method is a slight modification of the Grebral synthesis of amines, which uses potassium thalelamide and diethyl alpha bromomelanite here to prepare an imidomalanic ester. So this is an example shown here is a synthesis of methionine. So we can see that D-methionine is been synthesized here. One more synthesis involves via amido-malonyl synthesis. Recall that the malonylic ester synthesis can be used to prepare carboxylic acids, starting with dimethyl malonate. Dimethyl malonate in presence of a base will react with the alkyl halide and thereby form a new CC bond there, which upon hydrolysis we do get carboxylic acid, right? So this is the amido-malonate synthesis which employs here. So dimethyl malonate, diethyl amido-malonate as the starting material, enabling the preparation of racemic alpha amino acids. So we end up into racemic alpha amino acid. The process involves the same three steps used in the malonic ester synthesis, that is first step being deprotonation, second one being alkylation, third one being the hydrolysis and decarboxylation. During the hydrolysis step, the amide is hydrolyzed as well. Here is shown an example of phenylalanine via amido-malonate synthesis, where we are end up into racemic form. Strecker's synthesis. Racemic alpha amino acid can also be prepared from aldehyde via two-step process, which we call it as Strecker's synthesis, in which the first step involves the conversion of an aldehyde into an alpha amino nitrile, and in the second step involves the hydrolysis of this formed cyano compound to give a carboxylic acid. Formation of alpha amino nitrile likely proceeds via the following mechanism which I am saying. The resulting alpha amino nitrile will then undergo hydrolysis and will give us the racemic form of amine. To look into the mechanism, first step is the ammonia, the lone pair of electrons on the ammonia. If I take ammonium chloride, then it will get hydrolyzed as hydrogen chloride and ammonia. So the lone pair of ammonia will now act as nucleophilic in nature and will attack the carbonyl carbon of the aldehyde. Thereby a CN bond is going to be formed there. The nitrogen is going to bear the positive charge because it is forming a new bond with CN along with the 3 hydrogen bonds. The bond between the carbon and double bond between the carbon and oxygen is going to break down, and oxygen is going to get back its lone pair of electrons and thereby will attain negative charge. So this intermediate further, the negative charge of the lone pair of electrons on the oxygen will drag one of the proton from the HCl, formed HCl, and will form OH there, thereby nullifying its negative charge, whereas the positive charge on the nitrogen is as it is. Therefore this ammonia will again drag one of the proton from the NH3 plus there, and the positive charge on the nitrogen is also nullified there. So nitrogen will get back its lone pair of electrons, so do oxygen is getting back its lone pair of electrons in the previous step. In the next step, I am going to cleave away the OH by making it as a good living group, that is water, because OH is not a good living group. We need to make it a good living group by seeing that it abstracts the proton from the acid. So OH will abstract the lone pair of electrons on the oxygen, will go and bind with the, or will drag the proton from the acid and will form OH2 plus. Now OH2 plus is a very good living group, so it is ready to cleave away and go. The moment it is ready to cleave away and go, the lone pair of electrons on the nitrogen are given back to the carbon, and thereby the carbon and nitrogen will attain a pi bond now, and the nitrogen will gain the positive charge because it is again having 4 bonds there. Now further, the cyano group which is present there, which is nucleophilic in nature, will attack the will attack the C double bond N. Particularly the carbon position it is going to attack because it becomes nucleophilic, electrophilic in nature once the nitrogen is dragging that pi electron towards itself. Therefore, a new CC bond is formed there. A new CC bond is formed there. Earlier a new CN bond was formed and now CC bond is being formed there. In the next step, hydrolysis of this cyano group to a carboxylic acid will happen, and thereby we do generate a positive charge on the nitrogen because it can get back its hydrogen there. Therefore, it will get positive charge, that is it will form NH3 plus, and the cyano group is now hydrolyzed to carboxylic acid. Therefore, we have acid. So this is how we get an amino acid. alpha amino acid by the Strecker synthesis. So intramolecular proton transfer, imine formation is also indicated in the mechanism here. Enantioselective synthesis of L-amino acid, because L-amino acid predominantly exists in the nature. Now the above methods which we stated here, we ended up into a racemic mixtures. So we need to definitely go for resolution of the racemic mixture, which I will be saying in another minute. Now let me say enantioselectivity, how an enantioselective method can help us to synthesize the only L-amino acids. If I take a asymmetric hydrogenation here in this example as a L-dopa, right? L-dopa is an enantioselective synthesis of L-dopa I have done here, which is nothing but a dihydroxyphenylalanine. So resolution is not necessary here because I am only end up into this enantioselective synthesis using asymmetric hydrogenation of the sigma bond here, right? I add a chiral catalyst, number of chiral catalysts exist there. So when we add a chiral catalyst, then we will only synthesize the enantioselective, that is L amino acid form. Right. This technique employs a chiral catalyst and can be used to prepare amino acids with a very high enantioselective, that is percentage of EE will be very high. Thereby the process of resolution or resolving is avoided there, right, which is a cost consuming, time consuming as well, and you're involving a number of resolving agents also. Many of the chiral catalysts that have been employed contain a lithium atom, a complex to a chiral ligand such as BiNAp. So generally BiNAp, ruthium chloride complex is used as the chiral catalyst. There are many other chiral catalysts existing and lot of new chiral catalysts are also being employed in the synthesis of only the L amino acid. Next, let us see the resolution of DL amino acid. With the exception of glycine, which has no chirality center, the amino acids that produced by the method, by above synthetic methods, we can say that we do end up into a racemic mixture. To obtain a naturally occurring L amino acid, we must definitely go for resolving the racemic mixture. Therefore, resolution of amino acid is very important or crucial. One especially interesting method for resolving amino acid is based on the use of enzymes called as deacylase enzyme. These enzymes will catalyze the hydrolysis of N-acyl amino acid in living organism. Since the active site of the enzyme is a chiral, it hydrolyzes only N-acyl amino acids of L configuration without even bothering D configuration. When it is expected to racemic mixture, when we are treating this chiral enzyme with the racemic mixture, the N-acyl amino acids will only be resolved. Only the derivatives of L amino acids will be affected and the products as a result are separated easily. So we can separate easily. So L amino acid and D amino acid is obtained. D-acyl amino acid is obtained there. So further, because of their difference in the property, we can easily separate them. So this is one of the method using enzyme to resolve the racemic mixtures of amino acids. Polypeptide and proteins. Amino acids are polymerized in living systems by enzymes that form amide linkage from the amino group of an amino acid to the carboxylic group of another amino acid. A molecule formed by joining amino acid together is called a peptide, and the amide linkage in them are called as peptide bonds or peptide linkage. Each amino acid in the peptide is called an amino acid residue. Peptide that contain 2 or 3 or fewer, say for example up to 10 amino acids are called dipeptides. Tripeptides oligopeptides, polypeptides. But more than that, hundreds, thousands of the amino acids linked by this peptide linkage are called as proteins. So they are polypeptides consisting more than polypeptide chains, one or more polypeptide chains. So herein we have indicated you dipeptide, which is shown here, right? So polypeptides are linear polymers. One end of the polypeptide chain terminates in an amino acid residue that has a free NH3 group, and the other terminate is an amino acid residue with a free carboxylate group, that is COO minus group. The two terminals are now called as N terminals and C terminals respectively. Let's see a few more examples here how we are going to assemble of peptides from the basic amino acid moieties. For example, glutathione is a tripeptide which is assembled from the glutamic acid, cysteine and glycine. So cysteine and glycine are amino acids. Glutamic is an amino acid which are linked now, which we are going to link it and form a new peptide bonds. So we can see that between the glutamic acid and cysteine there is a new linkage, and between the cysteine and glycine there is new linkage. So these linkages are now peptide bonds, and together we call them now as glutathione. Glutathione. Okay. Glutathione is found in all mammals, and it serves as an important role as a scavenging of harmful radicals and electrophiles. Glutathione exhibits two peptide bonds as is comprised of three amino acids residues. When amino acids join together to form a peptide, the order in which they are connected is very important for us. For example, a simple dipeptide made by joining alanine and glycine, right? The peptide bond can be formed between the COH group of alanine and NH2 group of glycine, or it can be vice versa, that is COH group of glycine can be connected to NH2 group of alanine. These two dipeptides are not the same now. They are in fact two constitutional isomers. They are now two constitutional isomers. Right? The two peptide chain always have an amino group in one end is called N terminal, and the other end is called as having carboxylic acid is called as C terminus. So by convention, peptide are always drawn with N terminus on the left hand side when I am standing towards the board, and the C terminal on the right hand side when I am standing towards the board, towards you. Right? The sequence of amino acid residue in a peptide can be abbreviated with one or three letters abbreviations starting the N terminus. For example, a dipeptide of a glycine and alanine can be written as follows. N terminus is of glycine and C terminal is of alanine. Right? So we do write it abbreviation as GLY and AL. Please note, when I write GLY on my left hand side, that means it is towards the N terminals. The amine group has to be free there. When I write alanine on my right hand side, that means that the carboxylic acid group has to be free on the right hand side. That's how the notation goes. One more example here. Glycine and valine together joined, where glycine is the free end on my left hand side. Valine, the carboxylic acid, is on the free end on my right hand side. So GV is the abbreviation indicated here. I can write it also in the other form, that is valine can have a free end V, NH3, and glycine can have a carboxylic acid free end, therefore it can be abbreviated as VG. Please note, the first what I am writing is the amine, and the next what I am writing is the carboxylic acid free bonds, right? Therefore GV and VG. I hope it is clear. When I make a phenylalanine add on to it, then glycyl valine phenylalanine, GV, G, because the glycine part of the amino acid is free there, therefore G first, and then acid. From the valinal, my acid is been linking now, and the another one is phenylalanine. So GV indicates that what is free there, the amine group and the acid group. Alanine has been attached, phenylalanine has been attached there, therefore it is written as F there. indicating that it is linked there. Let us indicate properly again, drawing a peptide, which comprises of 3 residue units here, N terminals on the left hand side and C terminals on the right hand side. Do not forget about it. So I have taken here 3. So you can see that N terminal is written in red color and the C terminal is written in the blue color. So identify the residue here. So given to me is this structure, so I need to identify. So block it with the red amine group and with the acid with the blue color, right? So I have 3 reds for amine and 3 for the carboxylic acid. So what does that indicate? That indicates to me that there are 3 amino acids residues, right? So next, the side chain consists of phenyl, PHE, TRP and valine. What does that mean? Phenyl, trypsin and valine. So it is clearly indicated here. So in the next step, you look at the first step is the identifying the residues, right? Amino acid residue you identify and number it indicated with different colors, red and blue I indicated. Next, identify the side chain associated with each residue. So you identify each residue there, right? So that it becomes clear to you, right? So for example, phenyl, valine has 2 methyl groups and trypsin has a indole structure there. Triosine has an indole structure there, right? So that is being indicated there. And in the next step, finally, assign the proper configuration for each side chain. So we need to assign the proper configuration for each side chain. Here recall that all naturally occurring amino acids are S configuration, except for cysteine, which has R configuration. With this information, it is possible to draw each chiral center using CIP rule convention. Alternatively, the following stereochemical shortcut can also be applied. When peptide is drawn conventionally with N terminals on the left hand side and C terminals on the right hand side, all the side chains at the top of the drawing will be on wedge and all the sides at the bottom of the drawing will be on the dash. So this is a very shortcut which we use. You can use provided if you have written properly the chain, right? So I repeat, all the residues on the top are indicated with the dark wedge and all the residues which are indicated at the R groups which are indicated on the wedge line at the bottom, right? So they are the thin dash. Wedge line is nothing but a thin line, right? That we are writing it, right? So please remember this part, right? On the top you are drawing with a dark wedge and on the bottom you are drawing with a thin wedge or a dash line. In order to understand the 3-dimensional geometry of peptide, we must first explore the geometry of peptide bonds. I would recall here that the peptide bonds are amide linkages and the amides have a significant resonating structures that endorse the CN bond and some double bond character. Double bond character is indicated here, right? For C double bond N H2 with positive charge and the oxygen bearing the negative charge. As a result, nitrogen atom here is now sp2 hybridized and planar. Peptide bonds are simply amides and therefore exhibit double bond character just like a regular amide. In that case, peptide bond experiences restricted rotation, giving rise to 2 possible conformations called as S conformation and trans conformation. The energy that is required for this rotation is around 80 kilojoule per mole. The S trans conformation is usually more stable because it lacks steric interaction. That is present in the S cis conformation. In a polypeptide, each peptide bond will show a preference of adopting S trans conformation. Please note, in a polypeptide bond, each peptide bond is going to acquire a S trans conformation because it is the most stable conformation. Therefore, it is going to acquire the S trans conformation. Nevertheless, polypeptides are not entirely planar because they still possess sigma bond that experiences free rotations. Only the peptide bonds experiences the restricted rotation. So if you look at into in a molecule where R group is there, depending upon the number of R group, the number of sigma bonds is also going to increase there. So at one end is my C double bond end where restricted rotation is there, but at the same time the other end, because of the R group, there might be free rotation possible. So what we want to say is that wherever there is a amide linkage formed, that one is going to be restricted, whereas R group is going to experience its own free rotation, right? As a result, I can say that polypeptide can assume a variety of conformations. It's just not only one kind, it can have a variety of conformations depending upon all the residues that are going to be there, amino acid residues, and how the linkage is. Disulfide bridges. We see that two thiol groups can be joined via oxidation process to form a disulfide. This formed disulfide can be reduced to obtain a thiol group, SH group. Now, of 20 amino acids that are found in the protein, only cysteine contain a thiol group. As such, cysteine residues are uniquely capable of being joined to one another via a disulfide bridges. Disulfide bridges are commonly observed between cysteine residue because of the presence of sulfur in the same strand or between the cysteine residue of a different strand. So it can be between the same strand or it can be between the two different strands. So please note, I am indicating both the strands here. There are one strand where the sulfur-sulfur linkage or disulfide bridge is formed, as well as there are two where the disulfide bridge is being built between two two different proteins there. So if you see now when it is happening within one strand, then I call it as intra-strand, and when it is happening between two strands, I can call it as inter-strands. So disulfide bridge resulting within one strand is intra-strand disulfide bridge, whereas when it is between two different strands, then I call it as inter-strand disulfide bridge. These disulfide bridges greatly affect the three-dimensional structure and the properties of the peptide because they do hold, they do held, right? There is something blocking there, right? So therefore, because of them, the three-dimensional structure and property of the peptide will definitely vary. Peptide play a very important role in the biological role. For example, let us consider a pentapeptide. A pentapeptide made leucine leucine, methionine and enkephalin are both found in the brain, where they function in the control of the inflammation or pain. It is believed that they interact with the same receptor as morphine, and we notice that the sequence of these compounds are the same, except that the last residue is now leucine in one that is in leucine enkephalin, whereas in another one it is the methionine, so it becomes methionine enkephalin. So now when these are different, then they will definitely have a different functions. That's what exactly we want to say, right? Similarly indicated to us is one more peptide chain, which is a bradykinin. Bradykinin is again a hormone there. It is a non-peptide, 9 residues with the following sequences obtained there. There is no any if you look it into C-terminal and N-terminal, right? So this bradykinin is another biologically important peptide. It functions as a hormone, right, that dilates the blood vessels and acts as an anti-inflammatory agent, and is a non-peptide. It is having 9 residues which follow the following sequences as indicated here. Sequencing a peptide. The sequence of amino acids in a peptide can be analyzed by using variety of technique. One such is indicated here is Edmond degradation. Edmond degradation involves removing one amino acid residue at a time and identifying each residue as it is being removed. The process is repeated until the entire peptide has been sequenced. To perform an Edmond degradation, A peptide is first treated with the phenyl isothiocyanate followed by trifluoroacetic acid. These two reagents remove the amino acid residue at the N terminal and convert it into phenyl thiohadantoin derivative. Please note, hadantoin is nothing but a 5-membered 2 nitrogen containing heterocyclic moiety. Thion, because it contains a keto group, so there comes a thion. Thio, because it also has a sulfur group there. Therefore, phenyl thiohadantoin. Hadantoin is nothing but a nitrogen with the 2 nitrogen 5-membered with a carbonyl, keto carbonyl. Now, because thio is because of the sulfur there, therefore it will give a phenyl thiohadantoin derivative where R group is phenyl there. Now, this PHT derivative can be analyzed by a variety of different techniques. I can use NMR, I can use mass spectra, I can use FTIR, I can use I can run down and look into the even HPLC also using mass detector there or UV detector there. So, I can determine by different methodology there. Now, if at all how do I get this? How do I form this hadantoin? If I look into the mechanism, then in the free amino group which is present in a peptide chain there, right? See, N terminal has a free amine group, right? So, it has a lone pair of electron. Now, this lone pair of electron is going to attack this, it will act as a nucleophilic in nature and is going to attack or is going to share its electron to the phenyl isothiocyanate. Right, the carbon of the phenyl isothiocyanate will get now, and the bond between the carbon and the sulfur in phenyl isothiocyanate is going to break down into single bond from a pi bond, and sulfur will gain the negative charge because it is getting the extra electrons by breaking that pi bond. So, it will bear negative charge and the amine peptide free chain amine which was acting as nucleophile will now get positive charge because it is forming a new bond between nitrogen and the carbon. Right. So, now this intermediate what formed will have a intramolecular nucleophilic attack now again, because the sulfur is nucleophilic in nature bearing negative charge and lone pair of electrons will attack the carbonyl carbon of the next carbon, that is next to the alpha carbon, or I can say amide carbon, right, amide carbonyl carbon, because it is electrophilic in nature. Therefore, ring closure will happen and that ring closure will lead to a 5-membered ring closure. A 5-membered ring closure. Now, in the next step there will be a proton transfer happening. Proton will transfer and at the same time the hydrogen the nitrogen which is present is being given away or it will pull away, I can say simply, right. Therefore, that bond between the carbon and nitrogen is completely broken down, giving me a thiol of hadantoin, right. So, I obtain a thiol hadantoin. Right, loss of living groups happen there and then I end up into a phenyl thiohadantoin. So, this is the mechanism that we expect here to occur, right. So, this process can be repeated on a chain shortened peptide to another amino acid residue. So, it keeps on continuing, In this way, amino acid residue are removed one at a time until the entire sequences has been identified. This entire process has been fully automated and automated peptide sequences are capable of sequencing a chain as many as 50 amino acid residues, which can be easily identified. Merrifield, R.B. Merrifield developed a method for automating the process of the peptide synthesis, and in 1984 he received the Nobel Prize for this synthesis, which is also called as solid phase peptide synthesis, SPPS method, and it hinges on the synthesis of peptide residue by the residue while one end of the peptide remains attached to the insoluble plastic bead. Protecting groups and other reagents are still necessary in this also, but because the peptide being synthesized is anchored to a solid support by product, excess reagent and solvents can simply be rinsed away between each synthetic step without need for intermediate purifications. After the very last step, the polypeptide is cleaved from the polymer support and is subjected to the final purification by HPLC. So the method works well, so well that it is developed into an automated process. That's why we call this method SPS method as automated method also. So first is amino acid. First amino acid is attached to the solid phase peptide by its carboxylic group to the polymer bead, and usually with a linker or a space molecule in between. Each amino acid is then added by the formation of a amide bond between the N-terminal of the N-terminal amino group of the peptide growing on the solid support, and then amino acid carboxylic group, so on, right? To prevent the undesirable reactions, each new residue is coupled. A protecting group is added such that it can block the amino group of the residue being added. Once the new amino group has been coupled to the growing peptide and before the next residue is added, the protecting group of on the new N terminal is removed, making the peptide ready to begin to the next cycle of amide bond formation. So this continues, and once in the last step, the choice of protecting groups is done, right? So we need to deprotect them altogether, and orthogonal protecting groups have to be removed sequentially in order to separate in order to put the molecule into the HPLC instrument such that it can easily separate out. So there are number of steps where we follow to the separation. We follow the separations. As I said in the previous slide, peptide sequencing can be identified using number of techniques. One such is using mass spectroscopy, mass spectrometry and sequencing databases, where we are using ladder sequencing, tandem mass spectrum, partial hydrolysis and sequences from compression, etc. With this, I think let's go to the protein structure now. Proteins are fairly large organic molecules, and as such the structure of the protein is more complex than the structure of a simple organic compound. Depending upon the complexity of the structure, we further classify them into primary, secondary, tertiary and quaternary structures. First, let us look into the primary structure. A primary structure of a protein is the sequence of amino acid residue. In the figure indicated to us here, there are two chains, chain A containing 21 residue and chain B containing 30 residue. Each of them are going to be binding to one another now. In chain A, there is a disulfide linkage or bridge that is leading to form a intra-disulfide bridge, and now chain A and chain B are again going to link one another through this disulfide linkage itself, but the disulfide linkage is now between two strands, that is chain A and chain B. Therefore, it will be disulfide linkage which is going to be formed between chain A and chain B, right? So we can see that chain A also has a N terminal and C terminal, chain B has N terminal and C terminal. So this is a human insulin actually. The figure is of human insulin. So one strand of human insulin is indicated here. So this picture is of the general primary structure of a protein, how it is been going to form linkage. So we can see that there are hydrogen, oxygen, R group, nitrogen and peptide linkages which are indicated in the green color. So each residue is been joined to one another, amino acid residue is joined to one another, and that peptide linkage is clearly indicated here. Secondary structure. The secondary structure of a protein refer to three-dimensional conformation of localized region of a protein. To recall here that each peptide bond exhibits restricted rotation and a planar geometry. This is the case of each amino acid residue in a protein. So although the individual planes are free to rotate with respect to each other, their presence limits the conformations available to the protein. Depending on the sequence of the amino acid residue, localized regions of the peptide often adopt particular shapes. Now two particular stable arrangements, that are helix and beta pleated sheets, are indicated here. An alpha helix forms when a portion of the protein twists into a clockwise spiral. Each turn has approximately 4 amino acid residues, and each carbonyl group experiences hydrogen bonding with a NH group, that is 4 residue farther along on the chain. In an alpha helix, the R group, that is side chain, extend outward away from the helix. Whereas beta pleated sheets are formed when 2 or more protein chains line up side by side. In a beta pleated sheets, hydrogen bonding occurs between the carbonyl group and the amine group of the neighboring strand. The R group, that is side chain, are positioned above and below the plane of the sheet in an alternating pattern. Beta sheets are commonly formed from the segments that bear residue with a small R group, such as alanine, glycine, etc. With large side chain, steric hindrance prevents the strands from getting closer enough to one another. In that case, it would acquire a helix form, alpha helix form. Proteins are generally comprised of many structural domains, including alpha helix as well as beta pleated sheets. In order to draw a protein, we must first identify or illustrate a secondary structure by a shorthand writing, and then go for the flat helical ribbon presentation, an alpha helix, or while the flat wide arrow representing the beta sheets. So beta sheets can be either parallel or anti-parallel depending on the direction of the neighboring segments. Both chains of human insulin exhibit a alpha helix structure. Right. Tertiary structure. Tertiary structure is of a protein referred to its three-dimensional shape. A protein typically adopt a conformation that maximizes stability. In aqueous solution, a protein will adopt a conformation in which the polar groups are pointing towards the exterior of the protein and the non-polar are located to the interior. Consider the structure of a myoglobin here, a protein used to store molecular oxygens. The region marked in the red represents polar side, and they are positioned on the surface of the three-dimensional structures so that they can interact with the water, thereby maximizing the stability of the protein. Quaternary structure. Quaternary structure arises when a protein consists of 2 or more folded polypeptide chains called subunits that aggregate to form one protein complex. For example, hemoglobin, which is comprised of 4 different subunits, and each unit is called myoglobin. Each subunit is of hemoglobin is displayed in a different color here. The subunits have many non-polar amino acid residue, and as such there are many non-polar groups on their surface. These non-polar groups experiences of weak van der Waals interaction which hold the quaternary structure together. Function of a protein. Based on their shapes, proteins are often classified as fibrous or globularous. Fibrous proteins consist of a linear chain that are bundled together. Globular proteins are chains that are coiled into compact shapes. Further, based on their function, we classify as structural protein. Structural proteins are fibrous proteins that are used for their structural rigidity. For example, alpha keratin are the structures of protein that are found in hair, nails, skin, feathers, wool, etc. Transport proteins are used to transport molecules or ions from one location to another location. For example, hemoglobin is a transport protein which helps in transportation of molecular oxygen from lungs to the various tissue of the body. With this, I would like to close this session, and in this session I covered what are amino acids, what are essential amino acids. I gave the physical and chemical property of amino acids, gave the synthesis of amino acid and how do we resolve a racemic mixture of a amino acid, and also we saw about how the amino acids are going to link and form a protein, and how a We also dealt with different types of protein, primary, secondary, tertiary and quaternary structures and their functions and functions of protein. So with this I would like to end this session. Thank you.